Hello everyone, welcome to yet another session of the daily news analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles featuring in the Hindu newspaper and break them down for our understanding from the examination point of view. Let's start the discussion today taking the important articles. The important articles which feature in the newspaper of the Delhi edition of The Hindu are on our screens. Let's take up the first article for discussion. The first article which appears in the newspaper reads Green Touchstone, which talks about the latest Supreme Court decision on the eco-sensitive areas. In our previous discussion, in one of the videos, we had taken up the discussion on the Supreme Court's judgment on the eco-sensitive zone, and due to this eco-sensitive zone, which pertains to generally the protected area networks. We'll talk about what the eco-sensitive zones are. We'll be talking about everything. But this discussion on eco-sensitive zone and this judgment by the Supreme Court, which said that every protected area, that is a national park, wildlife sanctuary, should have at least 1 kilometer eco-sensitive zone around it. Every protected area should have this. So in this context, the Western Ghats, which are a rich biodiversity hotspot, as we know, which is a big forest area as well as a mountain landscape which houses a lot of flora and fauna and other animals. So in this context, the debate on this eco-sensitive zone has ignited again, and the article talks about the two committee reports that were instituted to deal with the balance of sustainability and development with respect to the Western Ghats, and those two reports are the Madhav Gadgil committee report and the Kasturi Rangan committee report on Western Ghats. These committee reports were basically instituted to deal with the future of Western Ghats as to how they should be dealt with. So it becomes important for us from the examination point of view to take a look at these reports, what these reports talked about the Western Ghats, and what is the concept of this eco-sensitive zone which is central to these committee reports. So let's start first of all by looking at the Western Ghats. When we say Western Ghats, what exactly are the Western Ghats? So they are a range of mountains on the western side of peninsular India. That is why they are collectively known as Western Ghats. And how many states they span in? So a part of Gujarat, right from the Tapi Valley, the Tapi River, which flows from Maharashtra. So the southern part of Gujarat, it starts from there, the ranges start from there, ranging from Maharashtra, Goa, Karnataka, Kerala, and then Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu, we might feel that it is in the eastern part of the peninsula, but the Western Ghats and Eastern Ghats meet in this region, and that is why Western Ghats are also counted in the Tamil Nadu region. So this is the span of Western Ghats. Predominantly, Western Ghats are dominated by which kind of forests? So predominantly we find the tropical evergreen forests in a lot of patches, and in the transitioning patches we find the tropical deciduous forest. So that is the nature of forest found in the Western Ghats. Then it is home to many endangered plants and animals, and it hosts India's richest wilderness in 13 national parks. So total 13 national parks and several other sanctuaries are located in the Western Ghats. That is why it is a very important ecological area in the Indian subcontinent, because it has extremely unique features of flora and fauna and a vast expanse of forest covered in 13 national parks and several sanctuaries. Therefore, it is recognized by UNESCO as one of the world's 8 most important biodiversity hotspots. So remember that these biodiversity hotspots are being surrounded and spread throughout the world, and UNESCO has identified Western Ghats as one of those biodiversity hotspots. Can you comment in the comment box below which are the other biodiversity hotspots in the country of India apart from Western Ghats? So moving on, these forested hills are also sourcing to numerous rivers, including the Godavari, Krishna, and the Kaveri. Now all these rivers find their origin point from these Western Ghats, wherein the Godavari rises from the Triambak hills in Nashik. Krishna, as we saw, rises in the Mahabaleshwar region in Western Ghats again, and Kaveri, as we saw in yesterday's session, rises in the Brahmagiri hills of Karnataka again, which form a part of Western Ghats. So that is why they become the source of origin of major rivers as well, highlighting the immense importance of Western Ghats. Alright, so after establishing the importance of Western Ghats, now let's come to the issue wherein the Supreme Court gave a judgment that every 1 kilometer surrounding the area of such a protected areas, whichever national parks or sanctuaries are there, there should be an eco-sensitive zone. What does this zone mean? That if this is the protected area such as the national park, 1 kilometer surrounding this national park will be the eco-sensitive zone. This is the meaning of 1 kilometer area surrounding every protected area such as national park or wildlife sanctuary. This is the concept of eco-sensitive zone. Why is it being kept like this? Why is the Supreme Court stressed on it? So that the area which is surrounded by the national park, which houses a lot of unique flora and fauna, and beyond that there are human settlements. So there is a boundary zone or a transition zone between this protected area and the human settlement, so that the interaction is smooth and there are less chances for man-animal conflict and other activities such as mining activities, construction activities, which if carried out harm the ecology of the protected area. So to prevent all of this, this transition zone is being kept and is called the eco-sensitive zone. That is what the Supreme Court's direction is all about. So these are areas which are located within 10 kilometers. So this is from 1 kilometer up to 10 kilometers. So different areas might have different extents of the eco-sensitive zone around the protected areas such as national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. Who notifies these eco-sensitive areas? They are notified by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Under which act? Under the Environment Protection Act of 1986. So this becomes an important point to remember from the prelims examination point of view. So Supreme Court declared eco-sensitive zones around 21 national parks. So there are around 21 eco-sensitive zones according to the 1 kilometer range of transition boundary. So now why has this ignited a debate and why is the article covering the Western Ghat region especially the reports? So in the 2000, the time of 2000s, when the government was focusing on protecting the Western Ghats, it instituted a committee known as the Motherghat Committee, which was tasked with dealing with the sustainability, balancing the sustainability and development of the Western Ghats. So the Motherghat Committee came out with its report on 31st August 2011, wherein it gave its recommendation as to how the Western Ghats development and its how to handle it should be dealt with. So we'll look at what the committee report said. But soon after the report came, there erupted a lot of protests by the villagers and all the residents in and around the Western Ghats, because they perceived that the recommendations of this report were going against their wishes. So we'll try to look at what the provisions of or what the recommendations of this committee report were, why the villagers and residents around the Western Ghats protested, and then the next report, which is the Kasturi Rangan report, why was there a need for the other report to come in. So first of all, when Motherghat committee report came in, it was formerly known as the Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel, which is known as WGEEP. So that is the formal name for Motherghat committee report. So if you see two names interchangeably used anywhere, we should not get confused. So what was the primary recommendation? The primary recommendation was that all of the Western Ghats to be declared as the ecologically sensitive area with only limited development allowed in graded zone. So the approach that the Motherghat committee report took in order to protect the Western Ghats came out somewhat a drastic one, which said that all of the Western Ghat area should be designated as the ecologically sensitive zone area or ecologically sensitive area. Thereby what will happen? A lot of restrictions in terms of agriculture, grazing, mining, quarrying activities, all that can be done in these forested areas would come under restriction and serious prohibition in some cases, and it was designating all of the area of Western Ghats as this ecologically sensitive zone area. So that became the primary recommendation of the report. And further, where it designated all of the areas as eco-sensitive zone areas, it did not designate all of the area in one form. It gave 3 types of eco-sensitive zones divided in all of the Western Ghats. So it classified the Western Ghats into ecologically sensitive areas 1, 2 and 3. So it meant that there were 3 grades of ecologically sensitive area which the Madhav-Gadgil committee report promulgated. Of ecologically sensitive area 1, wherein ESA 1 would be high priority, which meant that those areas coming under ecologically sensitive area grade 1 will have most number of restriction in terms of grazing, agriculture, mining, constructive activities, where almost all the development activities, mining, thermal power plants were restricted in it. Right, that was the recommendation with respect to grade 1. Then other grade 2 and grade 3 ecologically sensitive areas will have certain less restriction, where certain leeways for these development activities and grazing activities would be permitted. So it specified that the system of governance of the environment should be bottom to top approach. So currently when we talk about governance, it is a top to bottom approach. What does a top to bottom approach mean? Wherein the officials sitting at the top of the ministry level or any such governance level will formulate a policy. That decision comes down to the ground and then it gets implemented. This approach is known as a top to bottom approach, where official at the top decides what to be done and then at the bottom it is implemented. But the report suggested that there should be followed a bottom to top approach, which means that right from the Gram Sabhas who are in the village should be involved in the planning process. In their say should be equally important in as to how the area is going to be dealt with. So it should be rather than a top to bottom approach. That was the recommendation of the Madhav-Gadgil committee report. It also recommended that the constitution of a Western Ghats Ecology Authority or WGEA as a statutory authority under the Ministry of Environment and Forest with the powers under the Section 3 of the Environment Protection Act. It recommended setting up of a statutory body known as the Western Ghats Ecology Authority. What would be the use of this body? It would deal with all the issues with respect to the Western Ghats, about its protection, dealing with all kinds of inspection of these activities. For that, he suggested, the committee suggested that there should be a statutory body. These were the major recommendations which were made by the Madhav-Gadgil committee report. But as I said, when this report came out, it was met by massive protests by the residents living in and around the Western Ghats, because they felt that it was an attack on their free habitation in the Western Ghats, and it would hamper their activities in the Western Ghats of agriculture, grazing and other things. So therefore, it was criticized for being more environment friendly and not in tune with the ground of realities, which meant that it was not able to effectively balance between the sustainability of Western Ghats as well as balancing it with the development activities which should be carried out with the Western Ghats. Why? Because as in the grade 1 ecologically sensitive area, where almost all developmental activities such as mining and thermal power plants were banned, in Western Ghats, which essentially is a power deficient region, such thermal plants are important in those regions. So these were some of the problems which were faced when this report came out. So in order to tackle the problems, the government formed another committee, which was the Kasturi Rangan committee report. Now this committee gave its recommendation and it sought to balance the development and environment. And what did it do with this perspective? It designated only 37% area. Remember, in the Madhav-Gadgil committee report, entire area was for ecologically sensitive area, and in the Kasturi Rangan committee report, only 37% of the total area to be brought under the ecologically sensitive area. So it decreased the area of designated as the ecologically sensitive area, and it also maintained the complete ban on mining, quarrying and sand mining activities in the ecologically sensitive area. So whatever the areas would be designated, these activities such as mining, quarrying and sand mining would be completely prohibited in these ecologically sensitive area. and no thermal power projects to be allowed and hydropower projects to be allowed only after detailed study, which means that in the ecologically sensitive area, thermal power projects won't be allowed, and if they are to be allowed, the hydropower projects will be allowed only after a detailed study. And the red industries, those industries which would be specifically marked as red, which means that they are highly polluting, to be strictly banned, such as mining and other such activities which would cause increased pollution and damage to the ecology of Western Ghats. And then the report recommended exclusion of inhabited regions and plantations from the purview of ESAs, making it a pro-farmer approach. So it tried to deal with the protests that were happening by the residents, wherein it excluded the inhabited regions. Wherever people were residing in the Western Ghats, it removed those areas from the ecologically sensitive areas and plantations from the purview of ESAs, making it pro-farmer, right? And these 6 states, as we saw, which form the part of Western Ghats: Kerala, Karnataka, Goa, Maharashtra, Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. So instead of 64% to be ecologically sensitive zones, reduced it to 37%. This was the major recommendations by both committees, which the Kasturi Rangan committee also tried to deal with, and it tried to formulate a plan to deal with the concept of Western Ghats. So in the context of rising news about the ecologically sensitive areas, this was a discussion with respect to the Western Ghats and its connection with the ecologically sensitive areas and the major recommendations of these 2 committees, which form an important part for us to know about from the examination. With this, let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears on the newspaper reads, government keeps small savings interest rates unchanged. Now we're seeing the action of economy, wherein a few days ago we saw that the interest rates of the repo rate and reverse repo rate were increased. As we saw, it was done to tame the rising inflation in the economy. In furtherance to all these practices, the government has also given its directives on the small savings interest rate. What are the small saving interest rate? We'll take a look at that, and it has kept these rates as unchanged. So we'll try to look what exactly are the small saving instruments, what do we mean by them, and what are the interest rates and how are they determined. So let's take a look at first the small savings schemes or instrument. What are small savings schemes or instrument? So first of all, when we talk about small savings scheme or small saving instrument, as the word suggests, they are small saving instruments, which means that they are those kind of schemes or those kind of initiatives promulgated by the government which are meant for the citizens' improvement in their savings. By investing in these schemes and instruments, they can increase their savings, and these are done on the small basis. So that is why they are clubbed or known as small saving instruments. They form the major source of household savings in India and comprises 12 instruments. There are nearly 12 instruments which are collectively called as the small savings schemes or instruments. What are they? We'll take a look at that. The depositors get an assured interest on their money. Whenever we talk about saving, which means that a citizen would be depositing their money in any of these scheme or instrument, which we'll take a look at what exactly are they, and they by investing their money, in return they would be getting an interest on it. That's how they would be able to increase their money and result in savings. So they get assured interest on their money. So citizens use these small saving instruments, invest their money in it and take interest on it and increase their savings. So these collections which all these citizens would be making as deposits of their money, this is collected by the government. Since all of these schemes and instruments are run by the government or government owned enterprises, so the money essentially would be owned by whom? Would be collected by whom? The government. And this collection from all small saving instruments are credited to the National Small Savings Fund. So there is a separate fund instituted for the collection of all the deposits that are made and collected from these small savings schemes, and they go all under the fund of National Small Savings Fund. We'll take a detailed look at this fund in a bit. Moving on, these small savings fund have emerged as a key source of financing the government deficit, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. How has it resulted into a key source of financing? Because the amount collected by the government under these small saving schemes become a source of revenue for the government, and it can borrow from this fund to finance its deficit, right? That is how it has become a major source for financing the government deficit, especially after the pandemic, which has led to a ballooning of government deficit, necessitating higher need for borrowings. And how has government sufficed its need for higher borrowings? By borrowing from the National Small Savings Fund. Now, what are these instruments? These small saving instruments are classified under 3 broad heads. These 12 instruments. So, first heading is the postal deposits, those schemes which are accessed from the post offices of the country, where money is deposited in the post office. Yes, we might not know this, but money is also deposited in post offices, and those schemes are either in a savings account, recurring deposits form, time deposits of varying maturities, and monthly income scheme. These are the various small saving instruments which can be accessed via postal deposits. And second is a savings certificate, where there are different certificate schemes involved. So one is the National Small Savings Certificate Scheme, and second is Kisan Vikas Patra. All of these are meant for savings for various residents, wherein they may take use of this scheme, deposit money and get interest on it. Then third category is of the social security schemes, the Sukanya Samriddhi scheme or the Public Provident Fund, which is the PPF, and Senior Citizens Savings Scheme. These are all social security schemes under which a part of the income which the persons own, like in the case of Provident Fund, are deposited with the National Small Savings Fund under Provident Fund scheme, and later on that worker will get an interest on it. So these are all the schemes which are clubbed under the bracket of small savings schemes. And how are the rates, the interest rates now that the article is talking about, which have been kept unchanged? How are they determined? So interest rate on these small savings schemes are reset on a quarterly basis. So in the 12-month period, every 3 months these interest rates are reset and repromulgated in line with the movement in benchmark government bonds of similar maturity. So these interest rates are basically linked to government's securities, which are also known as G-Secs, or those bonds which are promulgated by the government in the market to borrow money and assure the bond takers with increased returns once the bonds mature. So the rates of the small saving instruments are basically linked with these government securities or bonds that they float out in the market to borrow money. So they are linked with these bonds of similar maturity, and the rates are reviewed periodically by the Ministry of Finance. So they are reviewed by the Ministry of Finance, and the Shamala Gopinath panel in 2010 constituted on the small savings schemes had suggested that a market linked interest rate system for small savings schemes should be done. So currently, where the interest rates are determined by the government bonds, the government securities, the Shamala Gopinath panel suggested that rather than linked to the government bonds, they should be linked to a market related system, where as the market is fluctuating, going up and down, that they should be linked to the small savings schemes. So that was the determination of rate for small savings scheme. And now about the National Small Savings Fund, which we saw, all the money that is collected from these 12 instruments that is going into this fund, which the government is borrowing from to fulfill its deficit programs. So this National Small Savings Fund is in the public account of India, which was established in 1999. So this is an important fact. It is instituted under the public account of India. So there are various accounts under which the government keeps its money. One is the contingency fund of India, other is the important consolidated fund of India, from which all the money that the government uses it takes from, and the third kind of account is the public account of India, which houses the National Small Savings Fund. This fund is administered by the Government of India Ministry of Finance, under which also Department of Economic Affairs under the National Small Savings Fund Custody and Investment Rules 2001. These rules designate which body would be dealing with the fund, and which is that body? Ministry of Finance. Under Ministry of Finance, Department of Economic Affairs deals with the National Small Saving Fund. The objective of this National Small Saving Fund is to de-link small savings transaction from the Consolidated Fund of India. So the idea of keeping it in a separate fund was to de-link its collections and its dealings with the Consolidated Fund of India and ensure their operation in a transparent and self-sustaining manner. And the difference between the Consolidated Fund of India and the National Small Savings Fund, which is housed in the public account of India, is that since it operates in the public account, its transactions do not impact the fiscal deficit of the center directly. So whenever the fiscal deficit, which is what? The difference between the expenditure that the government makes in an economy with the revenue that it earns. So if there is less revenue and more expenditure that the government has to do, what that will result into a deficit of deficit, or with the amount of extra borrowing that the government would have to do. This is known as the fiscal deficit. So when we calculate the fiscal deficit, the National Small Savings Fund is not calculated while calculating the fiscal deficit. That's an important fact to remember for the National Small Savings Fund and the small savings instruments. With this, we finish the discussion and let's move on to the next article for the day. The next article which appears again, which pertains to the economy section, reads, banks have capital to buffer any shock. Now, this article pertains to the biannual financial stability report, which is brought out by the RBI. Biannual means that it is brought out twice in every year, which deals with the macroeconomic situation of the economy as well as talks about the global economy as well, and how are the various banks and various banking institutions are performing and what is their status. So we'll be studying about the financial stability report and what are its major highlights which this article is talking about. So first, about the financial stability report, which is published by the RBI biannually on behalf of the Financial Stability and Development Council, and which is an umbrella group of regulators which gives an overview of the health of India's financial system. So an overview or review from time to time about the financial system and economy is very important. That is what the Financial Stability Report does, that twice a year it gauges gauges the situation on various parameters and gives out its highlights. So it reflects on the risks to financial stability and the resilience of the financial system in the context of contemporaneous issues, which means that issues which are going on in the economy relating to development and regulation of the financial sector. That's what the report overviews, and it looks at the state of both the global as well as domestic economy, as I mentioned. So it focuses on public and private banks with the following aspects. So when we talk about the financial health of any economy or the financial sector, which institution stands at the center of it? These are the banks. These are the various banking institutions such as the scheduled commercial banks or non-banking financial institutions. So it looks at all the parameters for these banking institutions. So they look at the capital availability for working, which means that these banks, while operating, do they have enough capital wherein if there comes any shock to the economy, such as right now what are the kind of shocks going on due to the impending Russia-Ukraine war. There come a lot of fluctuations in the commodity prices, where a big supply chain is linked with all of the countries, and even if one country is not able to supply its raw material or composite material, the whole supply chain gets disturbed. So this results into fluctuations in the commodity prices, the rising prices of importing crude oil. So all of these leads to the fluctuation in the economy. So the Financial Stability Report checks the capital availability of these banks, and then it also checks the cost of NPAs, or what we saw, the non-performing assets, those loans which are not able to be returned back to the bank. Those are categorized as NPAs, and whether they are manageable. So it looks at the status of non-performing assets of the banks. Then what is the credit flow in the different sectors on the economy, and the credit flow at the personal level, that is the household levels as well. Then it looks at the macro financial risks, which means that macro means at a pan-India level, financial risks in the economy. And it also looks at the macro financial risks refer to the risks that originate from the financial system but affect the wider economy. As I said, pan-India level, as well as the risks to the financial system that originate in the wider economy. Then stress tests are also performed by RBI as part of financial stability report as to how much stress are these banking institutions under. So based on all these parameters, what have been the major highlights of the financial stability report which has been published recently by the RBI? The major highlights are, first of all, let's look at the highlights. The major highlights which have been given by the RBI is that these scheduled commercial banks and NBFCs are well placed according to the RBI in terms of handling the uncertainties in the economy. Whatever uncertainties are currently going on in the Indian economy, which is directly or indirectly impacted by the global economic shocks, the RBI says that these banking institutions are in a good position to deal with these shocks. And on the basis of capital to risk weighted assets ratio, what does this mean? As I said, the parameters was to measure the availability of capital. So capital to risk weighted assets ratio is an instrument to measure the sufficient availability of capital existing with the bank and the NBFCs. So the report says that this capital to risk weighted assets ratio, or CRAR, of scheduled commercial banks has risen to a new peak of 16.7%, which means that 16.7% of the total capacity is the capital that they have kept aside, which signifies the shock protection that would be granted if any uncertainty arises in the Indian economy. And their provisioning coverage ratio, this is another instrument which is the PCR, or provisioning coverage ratio, which again is a measure of money that should be kept aside from the bank in order to deal with the shocks in the economy. This has also stood at around 70.9%, which has again risen from 67.6% in March 2021. So this shows the good health of the banking institutions. Then on the NPAs, the gross non-performing assets, which are the total non-performing assets of a banking institution, indicate that these NPAs have also slipped, which means that it has decreased to a 6-year low of 5.9%, and the net non-performing assets, or the net NPAs ratio, fell to 1.7% in March 2022. So this is also good development according to the RBI's report, wherein the gross NPAs have fallen from to a 6-year low of 5.9%. So these are the major highlights pertaining to the financial stability report. Why does this report become important? As we saw, the significance is that it helps in assessing the health of financial system of the economy, as we are seeing. It helps as an early warning system in the case of a financial issues. Coming from the central bank, that is RBI itself, it is reliable and the growth and fallouts can be trusted. And making the fallouts in the report as points to work on will give the country a direction towards growth. So review of all the indicators become important for us to see what changes are required in the future to be so that these problems can be tackled with. With this, let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper reads, "Concern over shortage of leprosy drug in the private sector." Now this article becomes important because the disease of leprosy, which is quite prevalent in India, it becomes important for us to look at that disease. It becomes important for us to study it from the prelims point of view, wherein we study general science, where various diseases that are of national importance and are prevalent in the country, we take a look at that and questions can be asked on that. So let's look at a few things about leprosy. What is leprosy? It is also known as Hansen's disease, which is a chronic progressive bacterial infection. So it is caused by a bacteria. But what kind of a disease is it? Caused by a bacteria called Mycobacterium leprae, which means that it is caused by a bacteria. And what are the areas of infection? Basically, this is a skin disease and peripheral nerves. It attacks on mainly the skin, wherein a lot of deformities are seen on the skin, and they affect the peripheral nerves, the upper respiratory tract and lining of the nose. This is where these are the areas of infections for leprosy. And what is the mode of transmission? It is mainly by breathing airborne droplets from the affected individuals. So the transmission of the leprosy from one person to another by breathing the airborne particles is also quite prevalent, and therefore it can be contacted at any age as well. So that is what makes this disease a very dangerous one. So during the first phase of the World Bank supported the National Leprosy Elimination Project, started from 1993 to 1994. So in order to deal with the problem of leprosy in the country, which has more than 1 lakh cases recorded of leprosy every year, that is the prevalence of leprosy in the country. For that, the Indian government started the National Leprosy Project in 1993-1994. And in the year 2001, after the global elimination was achieved, which meant that WHO declared that there was a elimination of leprosy in most countries. Out of the 14 countries in which the leprosy was not able to eliminate, India was one of them that missed the target of eliminating leprosy. So India is behind its target to eliminate leprosy in the world stage, wherein the National Leprosy Eradication Program then was launched after this. Earlier it was the National Leprosy Elimination Project which started. In order to amplify the efforts, the National Leprosy Eradication Program was launched to achieve the goal of elimination of leprosy as a public health problem, which is defined as there should be as less than 1 case per 10,000 population. When such a stage would be achieved, where there would be less than 1 case as per 10,000 population, that is when it would be assumed that leprosy as a disease is achieved to be eliminated, and it was achieved at a national level in December 2005. So what is the news article talking about then? The news article is talking about a very critical drug which is used in the treatment of leprosy, that is the clofazimine. This drug, which is a part of the treatment process for leprosy, the news article talks about the shortage of this drug is mainly the private sector hospitals. The government sector hospitals and pharmacies are in supply with the drug, but it is mainly the private sector hospitals and pharmacies which are facing the shortage of clofazimine, and it is a part of the three drug process, is one of the essential 3 drugs in the multi-drug treatment of multibacillary leprosy, which is the disease and the treatment, and the other 2 drugs are rifampicin and dapsone. So clofazimine becomes an important drug that can be asked in the general awareness about the everyday issues, and it is used for leprosy cure. This is the information that we can take away from this article. With this, let's move on to the next article for the day. The next article which appears on our screen reads, Russia withdraws from Snake Island. Now the Russia-Ukraine crisis, we have been looking at it from a long time now. It's close to more than 3 months that has happened since the Russia-Ukraine crisis has broken out, and Russia, after an all-out invasion on Ukraine, has now restricted its conquering of the territories on the eastern and northeastern region of Ukraine, right? So it is now focusing on taking the territories which are placed on the eastern and northeastern region of Ukraine, and consequently in these activities of invasion, it has withdrawn from the Snake Island, which is situated in the Black Sea. So in terms of the locations which are often asked in the prelims examination, the location of Snake Island becomes important for us to see. So the question can be asked as to in which area is the Snake Island found, or pertaining to which country. So that can be asked. So we'll take a look at the location of Snake Island and other important locations with respect to the Russia-Ukraine war. So what is the location of Snake Island? This is the country of Ukraine, which is adjacent to Russia, and this is where all the activity is happening, and this is the Black Sea. This in the area of Black Sea, a small island which is there in the Ukraine coastal waters is the island of Snake Island, or which is also called Ziminy Island or also Serpent Island. These are the various names, which is located 35 kilometers from the coast in the Black Sea to the east of the mouth of the Danube River. The Danube River, which flows from the Europe continent and drains into the Black Sea, and roughly southwest to the port city of Odessa. Now this is an important port city which is here, the Odessa, which is housing the grains, the wheat grains which Ukraine supplies to the world, which is why these two countries are known as the bread basket of the world, because they supply major grains to whole parts of the world. So this Odessa port city is currently housing these grains, which up until now Russia was blocking and not letting these grains flow from the ships to reach different countries, and Russia has now withdrawn from this Snake Island. So this is a good development that has happened from the side of Ukraine, where it has able to take back one of its territories, that is the Snake Island. Now what are the other regions which currently Russia has able to conquer? Those regions are the Donetsk and Luhansk region. These are those regions which Russia on February 24, when it invaded Ukraine, declared these regions as independent of Ukraine, and these are the two regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. These two regions are together called as the Donbas region. So whenever you listen or hear in the news talking about the Donbas region, it is essentially talking about these two provinces of the Luhansk and Donetsk. And this is the Crimean Peninsula, right, which was very important for Russia from its point of view, which it annexed in the year 2014. So these are important locations with respect to the Russia-Ukraine invasion and about the Snake Island, which the article talked about, right. With this we finish today's discussion on the important articles. We'll meet again tomorrow with tomorrow's important articles. Thank you.